Hello, you are listening to Dr. Victor Sojo. I am a senior lecturer in leadership at the University of Melbourne, and I do research about a wide range of topics there. One of them is unconscious bias at work, which I'll be talking to you about today. But I also do research about sexual harassment and sexism at work and in sport, and about leadership development, particularly in the public sector. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about, as I said before, unconscious bias at work. I'll try to make clear the distinction between unconscious knowledge and unconscious bias. I'll also talk about different kind of biases that you might encounter when you are making decisions and judgments in occupational context. And I'm going to wrap up talking about some strategies, things that people could do to deal with unconscious bias at work. Typically, when I give this presentation, I have more than 20 minutes. So I go and engage in a lengthy process of explaining certain key elements of the human mind. So I'm not going to have the time to do that today. But this will give you an idea of the kind of things that I would talk about. So this is the actual beginning of the presentation that I'm going to give today. So let's talk about unconscious knowledge and unconscious bias. Typically, people, particularly lay people who don't know anything about the human mind, would think that unconscious knowledge and unconscious bias are the same, but they are not. So unconscious knowledge is about the wide range of implicit associations and automatic assessments or evaluations that you have in your long-term memory. This is the kind of, we call them implicit because you are typically not aware of the fact that you have all of this information stored in your mind. Okay, so that's sort of what unconscious knowledge is. Whereas unconscious bias have to do with manifestations of unconscious knowledge or poor information or poor analysis in your explicit actions. Let's unpack that a little bit. So, unconscious bias refers to a consistent tendency to respond in a particular way. We call it unconscious because this is the product of fast, intuitive thinking that happens without you being aware of it. Okay, you are not aware of two things, typically of the fact that you are responding in a biased way, but also you are not aware of the impact of that specific way of behaving and what impact it could have on yourself, on other people, or on processes. Unconscious bias is also problematic because it is suboptimal, okay? So basically this sort of consistent behavior that you are displaying, it doesn't take into consideration relevant information that might be in front of you or relevant information that should be in front of you, but because you're not really doing good research or talking to the right people, you don't have that information there, okay? It is also suboptimal because it means that you're not adapting to the situation that is in front of you. And by that, I mean situations where, let's say, you have a patient that is presented to you in a specific way, and because you have had 25 patients in the past that are presenting to you in the same way, you use all of your expertise and your experience to respond to that patient exactly the same way that you've done with previous ones, okay? And most of the time, that is fantastic, right? So that's very effective. That allows you to deal with the situation that is in front of you in a quick way and in a way that is based on expertise. But sometimes there will be specific elements of the presentation of the patient that you need to take into consideration when you're analyzing what's going on with them, okay? In such a situation, if you don't factor in the information that is in front of you, the peculiarity or the idiosyncrasy of the presentation of the patient, you might be missing certain elements that are important for the diagnosis and the treatment of the person that is in front of you, okay? And so in biased decision making, what you typically observe is that people either ignore information that is in front of them or they don't look for the right information, and they typically do not respond to what's in front of them, taking into consideration what is there, but previous experiences, implicit judgment, implicit associations. And where do you see bias? Well, it could creep in anywhere, okay? So you could see it in your judgments, in your decisions, or in the way that you behave, either to, to change a process or in the way you treat people. And as I said before, it's not the same as unconscious knowledge, but it is possible for that kind of information that you have stored in your long-term memory to have an impact on how you behave. But as I said before, they are not the same. And importantly, it is possible for you to consciously engage in a cognitive task and to override or to produce decisions that are unbiased. And so sometimes that has to do with you being more motivated and cognitively active, which allows you to better analyze the situation that it's in front of you. And sometimes it has to do with the environment and with the way the information was presented. So framing is very important here. So basically the way the information is organized, if it is simpler and clearer, is it presented to you in steps, for instance, as opposed to all in a single go, all of those things will impact your capacity to analyze the information that's in front of you, and obviously the quality of the decisions that you might end up making. So that's like a brief introduction to the concept of unconscious bias. As I said before, I do research about a wide range of topics. One of them is bias, but I particularly focus on gender evaluation bias. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples that have to do with that area of work. And I'm going to illustrate it with a pretty, simple but also kind of silly sort of exercise. This is what happens when you Google CEO. If you go into Google Images and you Google CEO, this is the kind of images that appear, okay? So as you could see, overwhelmingly what we're seeing are pictures of men. So I did that like half an hour ago, that search. And overwhelmingly, people are white, okay? Interesting enough, they present to you a different category for female CEOs because the real CEOs are men, right? And so if you want pictures of women who are CEOs, you need to go to that specific category. We wouldn't lump them together. When I did this in 2019, something similar happened, but interesting enough, back then when I did it, there was categories for male and female CEOs. And as you could see, I skipped 2020 because that year shouldn't count at all for anything. In 2017, we found something similar again to what I found today, right? This idea of having a separate category for female CEOs and, mainly a bunch of white men. And in 2016, which was just bizarre, the only image of a woman, I guess, and you could say, that I found when I did this search was of the Barbie CEO. So I suppose we have made progress over the years. So you might be asking yourself, why did he present to us all of these images? Well, because we know there's plenty of research showing that in societies, particularly in Western society where this research has been conducted, there is a strong association between leadership and gender roles. In particular, we know that there are strong associations between the way that we think about leaders and the way that we think about men and women. So when we do what we call stereotype content research in social sciences, we try to identify what are the core attributes that people associate with men and the attributes that they associate with women. And what we know is that when we ask people to think about a leader and what kind of characteristics they have, the number of attributes that they mention are typically more aligned with the stereotype of what it means to be a man. And rarely or it's way less common for them to start naming attributes that we typically associate with women. And again, remember, I'm talking about stereotype content, not about the way that men and women actually are in real life, but the way in which people imagine men and women to be. For us then, the important question here is, does it matter? Do these stereotypes that people have and this association between men and women and positions of power, do they have an impact on the way we evaluate men and women? because maybe it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't play out in the way we judge people at work in particular. So we did a meta-analysis in 2012, and that has been corroborated by another meta-analysis that was published later on, where basically in these sort of studies, we analyzed 151 studies where we tried to look at a situation where both we have CVs in recruitment and selection processes where every single little bit of information is the same between the two candidates. The only difference between them is the gender, okay? And we manipulate the gender based on the name of the candidates or using pictures. And in those situations, we basically ask people to evaluate the candidate across a wide range of attributes, such as competence for the task, do you like them socially, would you like to hang out with them, and so on. And what we found in this research, this is from a meta-analysis of 151 studies, okay? And what we found is that particularly when people are evaluating candidates in positions of power, they see women relative to men who are presented, described in the exact same way, as being less competent for the task, less desirable as leader, less likable, so they wouldn't want to hang out with you outside work, or introduce you to their families and so on. They are less likely to hire female candidates, and of course, they don't think that women are going to have the same career success that the male candidates are going to have. So whether we like it or not, these stereotypes appear to be at play in occupational context. What's really good for us, that's very important, is that fortunately, we found that the effect sizes that we saw here were smaller with professionals and with the HR practitioners. So basically, having experience at work and understanding what's important for work actually reduced the magnitude of the bias that people were showing. So that means that experience and training could actually help a great deal in these sort of situations. So what I just presented to you are basic examples of evaluation bias that you could find in occupational context. However, there are many other different kind of biases that you could find at work. And obviously, I'm not going to have time today to go through all of them, okay? So I will, advise you, if you want to learn more about unconscious biases, you could just go and read a bunch of these papers and articles that explain them in detail. But I do want to give you some examples of biases, right? So situations, some of them is called, the affective heuristic, right? A situation where you're doing recruitment on selection and the emotional state in which you are has an impact on the way you are evaluating information in front of you. So when you're unhappy, you're harsher in the way that you make judgments about things that have nothing to do with how unhappy you are. Okay, and so your affect is used as information in a judgment that is not related to the source of the affect. So that's an effect that has been found in a number of experiments. Sometimes we engage in representative heuristics, which is basically that when we're interacting with a specific person that we think belong to a specific social category, we behave in relation to them in a way that is similar to how we would act with other exemplars of that social category. So imagine a situation where, a specific ethnic minority background patient comes from a specific region of the world where a specific medical condition is quite common, and you assume automatically that the reason why they are presenting to you in that way is because they are coming from this specific region, okay? When in fact there will be a wide range of reasons of why they might have that presentation. In task allocation, this is also very common to observe. People have, like a strong aversion for ambiguity. So when you don't know an employee who is new to your team, or when you want to make sure that somebody is able to perform the task, you continue to always allocate that important project to people who've done well before, okay? And that's fantastic because the task will be done. But when you're trying to manage a whole team of people, that could be a problem if you always go to the same person to give them important tasks, because that means that there will be a bunch of people around the team who are not learning how to do things, okay? So we need to think about better ways of dealing with important projects that That doesn't mean that you're always going to end up allocating the important project to the same person because you think that they are really good at it. And of course, this is another area which is quite problematic with unconscious bias at work. Situations where we basically, because we have been investing a fair amount of money and time in a specific project or research idea that is not really working, we continue to invest in this idea just because we have put so much effort and so much energy and so much money into it that we think we should continue to do that to see it play out. When in fact, we should be thinking about the future. We should be thinking about not how much investment we've made in this project, but is it going to work? Okay? Is this investment reasonable given the current environment and the future environment that we're going to be facing as an institution? Okay, so again, just a few examples of the kind of biases that we typically observe in occupational. And so the big question now is, what is it that we could do about these biases? There are no quick or fast rules to manage unconscious bias, but what we do know is that a good starting point is when you have this sort of fast, unreflective, initial intuitive decisions about a situation, instead of basically agreeing with others or letting the situation pass or look for more confirmation or hyper support your own view, maybe you need to step back and engage in a process of questioning yourself or others, challenging convention, looking for alternative solutions to a situation as opposed to converging too quickly when you're trying to solve a very complex problem, and analyzing situations. And I think analyzing situations is very important. All of you are working in the medical profession, so you understand this really well. Okay, when an operation doesn't work, when a medical process that we've done doesn't lead to the outcomes that we need, what you typically do is that you go and analyze every single step that you took. And you try to modify the process in a systematic sort of way to see if those modifications actually lead to better outcomes. It's the same here. So this is how we improve the quality of managing organizational processes and of managing our personnel in organizations. And again, so here I'm presenting you just a few quick examples of things that you could do depending on the kind of organizational process. So if we're talking about recruitment and selection, instead of recruiting people that you know because one of your colleagues recommended them, having open recruitment. So making sure that you're advertising those jobs, quite broadly, so that not just a specific group of people get the opportunity to get the job. Or when you are doing not the recruitment process, but the selection, de-identifying CVs. There are situations for academics, this is very hard to do, but there are environments where it would be possible for you to de-identify the job applications and select people based on the responses that they are giving you to a specific task that you have given them, okay? Or the way that they're responding to the selection criteria. Things that you could do in your teams, okay? Because we were talking about earlier about bias and in the way people are being treated. From calling out inappropriate comments all the way to having round robins during meetings. So if you notice that typically the people who are speaking at the meetings are the more senior members of the team, or only the people who have English as their first language, or only the boys, the men in the team are speaking, if you create a round robin where every single person in the team get a chance to spell out what they have to say, probably there will be more inclusion and more participation. Or if you're the leader of the team, don't be the first person to speak up, okay? So ask people about their opinions before you speak up so that they actually feel that they have the chance to be heard. What else? You could think about, when you are designing services for people, consulting with them, making sure that there are different opinions being brought to the table and that there is a proper process to collect those opinions, to incorporate that into the decision making, and to then check with the people who you consulted with to see if you have actually properly incorporated their views into your plan. Okay? Again, all I'm saying here is that unconscious bias and how to manage in organizational processes is not about trying to change specific individuals' minds. Okay, it is about thinking how you are doing organizational processes. It's about making them more open, making them more transparent, making sure that the right people are being consulted and are participating, making sure that you have proper mechanisms to listen to what people have to say, use the information that they are giving into your decision making, and then consulting again to make sure that you actually thought of them, okay? And whenever an error is being made, and again, I know that that's the kind of thing that medical doctors do all the time, right? And people in the health sector do all the time. But think about how you could apply that to also the way that you're managing your teams, because you want to make sure that everybody gets equal opportunities, equal chance to participate, to develop skills, and to show how good they are at what they do. And so whenever an error is being made in the way people are being managed, analyzing the process that led to that mistake in people management typically will lead to a better outcome the next time. So again, for you, based on what I just said, the question is, what is it that you could do about mitigating bias in your own teams, in the way that you're managing people, in the way that you're running your own processes? So looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have very soon. Thank you for listening to this brief presentation and, kind of hectic presentation. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to write them down and be prepared to ask them when we have the panel discussion. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye.